So at this point in our process, I'm ready to start putting on thicker texture on my painting. I've got a roadmap of color and value to help guide me, but I'm going to be covering all of that up. But basically with the same thing. The point now is to try to make a richer, more interesting kind of surface, right? This is a painting after all, right? So I'm going to use thicker paint. So probably a little more buttery, more right out of the tube. I might even start applying some texture paste, but that's probably fine to leave till another pass later on. I'm still making some corrections, still making a little more attention to detail now. But at this point, I'm really starting to hone in on what this final surface, this final skin is going to feel like. So to do that, I want to pick some kind of brush technique, some kind of style or way of handling, and I'm going to treat everything the same way. Whether it's the clouds, the rocks, the trees, or the grass, I'm going to handle everything the same way so it doesn't look like it's made up by 5 different painters. It's all going to be made by me, creating some kind of unique world with a unifying kind of feeling or theme to it. On my palette, I've got all the colors I need, and I just have more paint right now because I'm going to be using quite a bit more than I was before. Like I said, the paint's going to be thicker, butterier, more right out of the tube. In particular, I'm probably going to be using a lot of white. White tends to get used up really quickly. Just like our previous pass, I'm going to start in the background and work forward, just because that's the easiest thing to do. I'm going to start out with the white areas because once you add any other color, it very quickly gets everything else muddy. It gets hard to get your colors back to white. So I'm just going to rather rapidly use these kind of quick dashing sort of brush strokes, start capturing these clouds up here. There's quite a bit of contrast up at the top, whereas there's less contrast down here. And I'm going to quickly run through that. I like this paint to be kind of wet while I handle it, as I like a little bit of blending. At this point, if there winds up being a little bit of texture too, I'm okay with that too. I might actually choose to use a more textural brush later on. Right now I'm using a 1-inch acrylic brush. It's synthetic, so it has fairly soft, small fibers, as opposed to a natural brush that is going to pick up more paint and provide more texture. So I might switch to that natural brush later on. Once again, I'm not too worried about losing some of my edges here. I can always paint over that or wipe that off, which is exactly why I'm working from the back to the front. You also are going to want to make sure that your water bucket or your turpentine, if you're working with oil, is clean, right? Don't work with a muddy wash station. Don't have a muddy palette. If you have a muddy, messy station, you're going to have muddy, messy paintings. So keep your station clean. Change out that water every now and then. The background, I'm going to add a little bit of blue in there and start cooling that off. When you're dealing with clouds, I do not recommend painting straight off with gray, like black and white to make gray. I recommend starting off with white and blue. Just use whatever cool blue you've been using all along for your sky and use that to capture your shadows. And then if you need to gray out your clouds, add in that gray color to neutralize it. But I find if you start out with just black and white, like grays, you're going to wind up with clouds that are just, they don't look like they're part of the sky. The blue in the clouds will connect it to the sky that they're sitting in. And it'll feel much more natural. Now when I'm doing this, I'm thinking, man, maybe it would have been smart to start with my blue first. It is technically behind those clouds. So my next pass, I might actually do that instead. Right? If I'm going to be working from back to front, that'd be a lot smarter. So before I go on to the ocean, the rock, and the foreground here, I decided I do want to give another pass to the clouds. I feel like I can come back in with a little bit more care now that I've did the blue. So sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth you have to do. You can really only sometimes finish one part until you address another part. That's fine. Kind of getting these sort of flowing cirrus clouds. Just using the texture of the brush to capture that. And you can also see down here at the bottom, I brought in a little bit of yellow. There happened to be some in the photograph I was working from. And I like that that's there because it might connect a little bit of the warmth that's in the foreground to that in the background. And I'll probably later on bring some of these blues into the shadows in the foreground, right? It's going to be a very holistic sort of painting where the colors are going to connect from one area to the other. Just remember that whatever kinds of trees or plants that we have up here probably exist back here in these hills. Right? They're just transformed by the effects of atmospheric perspective. Moving forward another step, adding in more warm colors, and going to get a little more contrast in here. See, I'm actually bringing some of the cool blue into my shadows now. It's really fun to do. It looks great. It connects the foreground to the background. As you can see there, I actually put a bunch there, and actually it's probably overdoing it, but I kind of like it. I might consider doing that later on. Those cools can work really well in your shadows. You can get surprisingly saturated with it. At this point, I'm still breaking up the shadows and the rock into more manageable areas of light and dark, but I'm not breaking down to just 3. I probably have, about 5 different values that I'm using. I started out in this case with the shadows and then moved into midtones and then highlights. None of my highlights are really getting all that bright. Just in a few little areas. Where the light is directly hitting the rock. A lot of this rock is actually in shadow. And the funny thing about this rock is the color on it is a little disconnected from that in the rest of the painting. So I think I want to find some way to bring some cool tones in there. Maybe I'm going to bring some blues into the shadows. Some way, I mostly want to keep it warm, but somewhere I might bring in a little bit of blue. And this requires me to be a little bit brave. This might not work at all. I don't know. Let's see what happens. Just mixing some more of that cobalt blue. Let's just take a little bit of that. And yeah, I actually do like that. I often find if you're not sure where to put in a color, shadows are usually a pretty safe place to do it because it's easy to cover that up later on if it didn't go well. See, that one was too bright. I don't think I like that, so I'm just going to take a little bit of water and wipe that out. So this color is a really great way to be playful and start connecting the foreground, whatever's going on in the background. See, sometimes make mistakes more than once. Part of the trick is to keep your values close together. So if I'm going to add that blue in, I'm going to keep it right around the same value of whatever I'm painting on top of. As I reach the bottom portion of the painting, I'm just trying to replicate the kind of movement and texture and energy that I have everywhere else and capture some of the last bits of foliage. As you can see, I've brought in some of the blues down there into the shadows, and I think it's just wonderfully connecting to what I have up top in the sky. So I'm pretty happy with how this is going right now, and I should probably be able to quickly finish up these last little bits. I don't have to be too definite here, just kind of capturing that variety of color in all this foliage. Some of these trees maybe are a little bit more green than others. Some are kind of a bit more of a golden color. And working from the shadows in the interior to the highlights on the outside. Sometimes I'm just letting a brushstroke just be a brushstroke. Right? Not every single one has to get blended in. It's sort of nice when a brushstroke can be both a group of leaves and just a brushstroke. Right? It's kind of this wonderful moment where abstraction and representation collide.